Absolutely. In evolutionary terms, I would say that human evolved from a species that specialized on plants to a species that specialized on eating animals, so a carnivore. I can't begin to tell you how bad the science of nutrition is, and what the recommendations they make, the nutritional recommendations, on what poor scientific background they are based.
5 a day, 6 a day of fruit and vegetables, different colors, lots of fiber, lots of variety, lots of polyphenols, unprocessed food, plenty of fish, omega-3, not too much fat, not too much sugar. This is the essence of the received wisdom about the best diet for us, according to many diet and health books today. Well, how does that sort of diet compare, though, to the diet that we've evolved to consume? Where are the mismatches between the diets we're recommended and the diets we are genetically predisposed to? And what are the consequences of those mismatches? And anyway, how can we know what the diet was of our distant ancestors? Is it even possible to piece together what our forebears ate? Well, Dr. Miki Ben-Dor from Tel Aviv University has been publishing in this area for many years now, and he's pulled together about 15 independent lines of evidence that point to our ancestors having, until very recently in evolutionary terms, eaten, let's say, a great deal of meat in their diets. This runs counter, I think, to the long-held view that our ancestors, our ancestral hunter-gatherers, gained many of their calories from their gathering more so than from their hunting. That meat was almost, in some cases, an occasional bonus to an otherwise often plant-based diet, but that depended on where they lived, what was available that season, that year. The general idea that humans were highly flexible, but not that we were predominantly meat eaters. So, Miki, thank you for giving up some of your time today to speak to me about this most fascinating of topics, our ancestors and what they actually ate. Can I start by asking you, controversially, but very interestingly, you argue that evolutionarily, we human beings are basically entirely carnivorous. Can you just clarify for us, what does that mean diet-wise?
It means that most of their calories during most of human evolution, which took place about 2.6 million years, was most of the calories came from meat and fat and animal fat. And this is my conclusion after researching this area for quite some time.
Okay, so to be clear, Mickey, to be clear, you're saying that up until relatively recently, we'll come on to those time frames in a moment, but let's say take a human ancestor from, say, 1 million years ago or 2 million years ago. To the best of your understanding, the best of our understanding, perhaps collectively, based on evidence, the good majority of the diet, at least for a population that wasn't dying out or something, where they were getting the food that they wanted, the good majority of that diet was animal-based, where they were obtaining protein and fat from animals.
Absolutely. In evolutionary terms, I would say that human evolved from a species that specialized on plants to a species that specialized on eating animals, so a carnivore. Of course, we did consume plants. Nobody's arguing about that. And the definition of a hyper-carnivore by zoologists is over 70% animal food. So still, even wolves, for instance, eat plants from time to time. So to be a carnivore, you don't have to have 100% of the calories coming from animals. So I think this is more or less what humans were, hyper-carnivores, consuming over 70% of their nutrition from animals. And this is based not on 15 pieces of evidence. In the case of the paper that you're referring to, it's actually 25, of which 15 are have biological background. So I did something I think that was not done before in the same. It was done partially, but I did I collected evidence for about 10 years for that paper, and came to the conclusion that I just described.
What nutrients though can't human beings get from meat? I'm thinking people listening to this now, many will be aghast at the idea that we were, say, hyper carnivores, eating mostly meat, not entirely as you make clear, but mostly meat, when we're being fed information all the time in sort of self-help books, through the media, through newspapers, through national health foundations, through the WHO. We're being fed information all the time to say, as I kind of hinted at in my opening spiel, eat loads of fruit and vegetables, eat a great variety, make sure that's a large part of your diet. And a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, not necessarily just health, it could be environmental reasons, it could be ethical reasons, have phased out or are phasing out meat from their diet. So one obvious question to ask is, okay, but hang on a minute, aren't there nutrients that we human beings simply cannot get from a mainly, let's say, meat-based diet?
No, I don't think there are. The one that comes up quite often is vitamin C, and but still you have, used to have, at least in the Arctic, populations that actually lived only on animal foods, and they didn't suffer any problems with the shortage of vitamin C. So what happens, one of the explanation is that actually sugar competes with vitamin C, and if you consume a lot of sugar, you have to consume a lot of vitamin C in order for it to be effective. But animal tissue does contain small amount of vitamin C, and apparently it's sufficient if you don't have a competition from sugar. So this is the only one that comes up quite often, is this: how could you be, feeding only on animal food if you need vitamin C?
Do you know why there's such a push then from many health professionals, health experts or supposed health experts, to eat a good variety of fruit and vegetables? Make sure you get a lot of colors in your fruit and vegetables. Make sure you down a lot of polyphenols. Aren't there many substances in plants that aren't apparent in meat?
Yeah, maybe. I would say most of these guys are antioxidants. Maybe by eating plants, you have more problems with the oxidants. So you need more antioxidants. But if you eat only animal food, you don't have that problem. So you don't need to eat all these colors of fruits and vegetables. So I would again point to people who eat only meat in their diet, and there are some today in the Western world that do it, call themselves the carnivores. But in history, we had, in the northern areas, quite a few populations that actually fed almost 100% on meat.
Do we know how healthy those populations were? I mean, they do survive, but maybe they're hanging on by a thread.
No, they actually lived. Some of them lived to be 100. So no, there was no difference in longevity between these populations and other populations.
One of the confusions I think that crops up when discussing our ancestry is, well, what period in our past are we talking about? Because of course, human beings have been evolving to become human beings, if you like, from past ancestors for an extraordinarily long time. We could perhaps discuss a time frame of the hominids, for example. But my point is, you mentioned earlier, you talked about, 2 or so million years ago. As I understand it, evidence for our relatively recent, or very recent in evolutionary terms, our ancestors recently, let's say 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, the fossil evidence suggests that often they were eating a lot of plants and often a lot less meat. Now, do you contest that? Or otherwise, is that perhaps not particularly relevant because that demonstrates not what we're genetically adapted to, but what we behaviorally adapted to as our environment has changed in the recent past? Sorry, does that make some sense?
Yes, it is a process of adaptation to changing environment. What happened as far as animal food is concerned is that in the last 50,000 years of the Paleolithic, there was what is called the late Quaternary megafauna extinction, where a lot of large species of animals went extinct. And this caused a substantial ecological change whereby the plant source food became more available relative to animal source food. And so people had to adapt. And what we see, of course, this is my hypothesis, what we see is actually an adaptation to higher and higher quantities of plants. And the major step in this adaptation is actually cultural and not physiological. And I'm talking about the appearance of agriculture. If you look at agriculture, you can say that this is one big enterprise to remove fiber from plant food. So if you take wheat, for instance, wheat allows you, if you manage to remove the fiber, allow you to remove fiber quite easily and come and end up with the flour, yeah, which is very low in fiber. And this is one of the reasons, or maybe even the main reason, that wheat was domesticated. You can see if you follow the evolution of humans from, let's say, if we take chimpanzee as a model for our ancestors, which is not our ancestor, but it's, let's say we have a common ancestor, and it is taken quite often as a model for the ancestor because that's the one we have, and it more or less lived in the same conditions on the same ecology that our common ancestor lived. Their gut structure is engineered to process a lot of fiber. And the way we extract energy from fiber is we ferment it in the colon, in our case, with bacteria that produces mainly, by the way, fats, short-chain fatty acids, saturated fatty acids. And this is how most of the animals that consume plants actually get energy from plants, because plants in nature have a lot of fiber in them. So cow, for instance, cows get almost 100% of its energy from fats that were fermented, and of course from proteins, which is actually the bacteria that's fermented the carbohydrates. So humans change our gut structure, and in tandem, our teeth, changed. If you compare it to chimpanzee, quite dramatically. So our colon is 77% shorter than the same size chimpanzee would have, and our small intestines are 60% longer. So colon is where we extract energy from fiber, and the small intestines is where we absorbed protein and fat. So, and the teeth, again, are much smaller and actually quite adjusted to tear meat than to grind fiber. So you have to have flat teeth in order to grind the fiber to increase the contact area before it enters the stomach. And our teeth are not good at that. So we are adapted away from the consumption of fiber. And this does not make sense if our main nutrition would come from plants.
I mean, that's super interesting, but it raises 2 points to me immediately. One is that, again, we're often instructed to eat more fiber. That's often a concern raised by, I'm going to say, health professionals about modern diets, that we're not eating enough fiber, for example, because of processed food, or not eating enough fruit and vegetables, and that people get gut intestinal problems because the food isn't passing through the gut intestinal tract efficiently because of a lack of fiber. The other thing is, I remember being taught a very long time ago when I was at school that the human dental setup is a blend of everything. We've got canines, you know, they are predominant, but not very predominant compared to a lion or something. We have molars that are sort of more grindy and have a bigger surface area, which is a suggestion that we're a jack of all trades, that we're omnivores, that we're designed to eat pretty much anything that comes our way, as opposed to a lion that clearly has a very powerful jaw and very sharp teeth. So I'm throwing 2 points at you here. The issue about fiber and the issue about the fact that we don't clearly have a carnivorous-based set of teeth.
Okay. The fiber, look, you know, we could spend another hour discussing recent research and the level of research on nutrition. It's, in my opinion, atrocious. And but I will leave the subject because really that's a different rabbit hole that we can fall into. In terms of fiber, in terms of our teeth, sorry. So here we don't have to go all the way back to chimpanzees. We can go to Australopithecus, which was our predecessor. So if we go to human evolution, we sort of separated from chimpanzee about 7 million years ago, and we separated from Australopithecus about 2.5 million years ago. So if you take the Australopithecus teeth, they are flat and they are large. I'm talking about molars, okay? The molars are flat and large. The teeth of humans are molars. The molars of humans have cusps. So, and some a researcher built a machine, the name will come back to me in a minute, and sort of to simulate the teeth, and they work like chewing machine, okay? And he came up with when he put the teeth that they were similar to Australopithecus, they could not actually do anything to meat. And the teeth with the cusps, human teeth could actually tear the meat. And also, humans use tools to cut meat. So we didn't really need a lot of teeth to cut the meat. So the teeth, yes, of course. Look, I'm not saying that we are not omnivores. We are omnivores. But saying that humans are omnivores means really nothing in terms of diet. Because if you take, for instance, mammals, about 80% of the mammals are omnivores. By the technical definition of omnivores, which is consuming from 2 trophic levels. Okay, so 80% are carnivores, sorry, omnivores, but 75% of these omnivores are actually specialized in a certain area. They are not really, they're omnivores by technical definition, but they're not flexible in their dietary consumption. And my claim is that humans were exactly the same, because the dietary consumption doesn't only depend on the ability to digest the stomach to digest, but it also depends on the ability of obtaining the food, and then preparing the food, which is in humans is a bigger stage. So, for instance, take wolves and chimpanzees. Wolves are built to obtain animals, to catch animals. Chimpanzees are also omnivores, but they will never be able. You'll never find a chimpanzee that consume 100% or 70% animal material, because they are not built to obtain animal material, even if they were able to digest it. So the evolution, if omnivory does not mean flexibility.
Mickey, some people will be thinking, okay, we've talked about teeth. You make a good argument there, I think. But how on earth can we have a good idea about what our distant ancestors ate? So I wonder if you could briefly touch on, let's say, 3 lines of evidence that you think are, and I know that there are many others, but of course we can't go through them all. I will put a link to your excellent long form paper if people want more, but for the sake of giving people a flavor, 3 lines of evidence you'd like to pick out that support the idea of our predominantly carnivorous background. And I insist that one of those 3 lines of evidence is stomach acid. And the reason I say this is because my friend, whose name is Ricky, has asked me if Mickey will talk about stomach acid. Every time I chat with him, he brings up stomach acid. And so if that could be one of your 3, please, I'd be appreciative. So 3 particular lines of evidence that support the claim about our ancestry.
Okay, sure. So first of all, let's describe the problem. The problem is that when people wanted to know what people ate in the past, they came to archaeologists, because we dig and then we find the whatever we find, and we can say. But the problem is that archaeologists are really not the people to go to. I think it would have been probably better to go to biologists who specialize in humans physiology, because in the archaeological record you find everything. People ate everything that was available to them. There's no question about it, and we find every plant, wild plant, and that's edible, of course, and a lot of bones, etc., in archaeological finds. So my idea was that the archaeological record can't tell you, apart from one method, which is stable isotopes. And stable isotopes, you can find stable isotopes in human bones and any animal bones. And they are used not only in anthropology, but in zoology to discern the trophic level of an animal. So, and one of the most indicative, as far as humans are concerned, is the nitrogen-15 isotope, which accumulates as the food chains go up. So as the trophic level go up. So it exists in plants, and then herbivores will concentrate it somewhat, and the carnivores will concentrate it further. And those animals that eat carnivores will have even higher concentration. So you can take, if you measure the environment, because you have to be specific for that environment, if you can have data on the plants, on the herbivores, And on the carnivores, you can get and you can get humans. You can see where humans fall. The problem with this method, main problem, is that it's only available for the last 50,000 years because you need collagen, and collagen doesn't preserve well. So you can't go further than that. But if you take the last 50,000 years in Europe, I think 99% of the studies show, and I have a table in the paper, show that humans were fall together with the carnivores. It's just this is the method, and the method is not bad because when you take people from the Neolithic, okay, after the appearance of agriculture or domestication, you see already a higher consumption of plants. So the method is able to discern between plant eaters and animal eaters, carnivores and omnivores in our case. But most of the cases where humans and Neanderthals, by the way, were studied, they came up as carnivores. So this is one archaeological, let's say. But now you have to come. So now I was looking more into the physiology of humans, and I came across this paper, which found out that the structure of adipocytes, okay, fat cells, is different between carnivores and plant consumers. It so happens that carnivores, and by the way, herbivores, I mean, like cows, that don't consume a lot of starch or sugar, have, relatively speaking, more higher amount of adipocytes, smaller adipocytes, but higher number for the same amount of adipose that they have to store. And plant eaters have a lower number of bigger adipocytes. Okay, and humans fall straight into the carnivore pattern. So this is one. The other one you mentioned about the acid, okay? Another group of researchers compared the acidity of the stomach in various trophic levels. And they found that lower trophic levels, meaning plant eaters, have a lower acidity. And as you go up the chain, carnivores have higher acidity. And of course, scavengers have even higher acidity because they claim the acidity is there to take care of the pathogens that develop in meat but don't develop in plants. So the more pathogens they have, so the scavengers would have more pathogens to deal with, more pathogens than the carnivores. So if you put humans and try to place humans, actually, you find out that humans are there with the scavengers. We have about the acidity of our stomach is about 1.5. The pH is 1.5, which is very high acidity. Carnivores had like 2.2, I believe, and other animals had 5, or plant eaters had something like 7 to 5. 7 is water. So the authors say, oh, and that means that humans were scavengers, more scavengers than we thought. But really, these guys don't know how humans, what made humans special among the carnivores. And this is that humans actually take the prey to a central place and sit on it. We don't just compete with other carnivores like lions and hyenas do. We actually cut the meat, put it on our back, and we go back to our central place where we protect the meat, and where, if we say hunted a zebra, we can live on it for about a week. So during that week, we are actually like scavengers, but artificial scavengers. So we create our own scavenging situation. And now this acidity it's not a simple game. I mean, this to have a high acidity in the stomach is a big issue from an energetic point of view, and from from a evolutionary point of view. You need a lot of changes to make the stomach able to tolerate high acidity and to actually produce the high acidity. So this is another point. There's many points. Let me take another one. Let me think.
Can I just pick up on this one first of all? I don't want to cut you off in your stride because this is incredibly fascinating. But just to pick up, I remember once, this is an anecdote only. I was living as a lodger in a house where there was an Alsatian dog. And the Alsatian dog had got into the kitchen and had managed to grab the cooked, cooling chicken carcass that was still in the baking tray and was on the side counter. Okay, and it managed to get its paws up onto this side counter and drag the cooked chicken onto the floor, which was a bit unfortunate. And it started to eat this chicken, but it ate it, sorry, like a dog would eat a chicken. I mean, it didn't lick off or bite off the meat. It just took the whole thing. And I'd never seen anything like it. It was crunching through, I know it had been cooked admittedly, but crunching through these bones, just swallowing the whole thing. I think it's the case that there's no way a human could get away with that, or at least it'd be very risky to be swallowing down effectively bites of bone along with the meat. What went through my head at the time was, well, this is an example of a dog, obviously, its ancestor is a wolf, that is still displaying the kind of gut setup that its ancestors had. Very, very powerful, in inverted commas, in a simple sense, strong stomach acid, strong stomach lining to be able to deal with such food. But you're saying that human beings' stomach acid is even more acidic than that of most mammalian carnivores?
Yeah, the acidity of humans are more or less like the acidity of rocks, like bird scavengers. And by the way, the dog that ate so quickly the chicken is exactly a proof that carnivores, we are special carnivores. We didn't have the capacity to compete with the other carnivores to finish the meat quickly where we hunted it. So we had to cut it and take it so we never got adapted to, consuming very large quantities of meat at a short time.
Now, I just want to clear up an issue which often comes up, and I spotted it the other day. I know I messaged or emailed you about this just prior to our discussion. I spotted something. It was a piece on CNN online which was referring to a new paper, and I've got some notes here. I'm going to mispronounce this, but the Ibero-Maurusians were hunter-gatherers who buried their dead in an area that is now within the country of Morocco. This is between 13,000 and
Right. I
15,000
know
years
about
ago.
this. Yeah.
Yes, and they say this is adding to a growing body of evidence that challenges the notion human ancestors predominantly relied on meat. Now, actually, I'm not sure there was well, I think you pulled it together relatively recently that there was this body of evidence suggesting that human ancestors predominantly relied on meat. They're countering that. And I think the issue here, as you explained to me, behind the scenes, was we're talking 13 to 15,000 years ago, which is the blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, and represents human beings in a situation where they're almost victims of their own success, that they're now living in an environment where there is a lot less megafauna than there used to be because human beings have killed so much of that megafauna. And so they're having to behaviorally adapt their diet. But it's not just behavioral. I think there is some genetic component. And again, I look to these notes. Well, whether this is genetic or not, I'm not clear in terms of human being genetics, but it says starch adapted oral bacteria. Okay, so apparently, and I didn't look at detail of this paper, they found signs of starch-adapted oral bacteria, on some of the teeth of the fossils of these humans from 13 to 15,000 years ago. So that's suggesting that sorry, I'm going over old ground in a way, but that's suggesting that we also have adaptations for dealing with the ingestion of starchy foods.
Absolutely. First of all, I would like to point out that in my paper in 21, I already actually cite another paper that was researched this specific site, this specific archaeological sites, and actually came to the same conclusion already. So they just confirmed another conclusion that researchers like, I think the leading researchers is Humphrey. And he found, and the way that he came to the conclusion that they ate a lot of starch is because he found a very high level of caries, okay, of the teeth, crooked, teeth pathology, yeah, that is known to be the side effect of consuming large amount of starch. So, and then of course, also a lot of remnants of acorn. So that place, and they, by the way, say that this is the first appearance of a wide prevalence of caries in groups in prehistory. So that's exactly my point. So why there wasn't caries? Why we find perfect teeth in all the previous populations? Of course, 15,000 years ago, there were megafauna already started to, it was actually quite advanced already in disappearing. So people actually were driven, in my opinion, to consume starch. And every researcher liked to paint his research as going against the common or they found something new. They did not find anything new. What they found, they just confirmed something that was found before, and actually confirmed my point. If they did consume starch 15,000 years ago, and if they didn't have caries, it just proved that when you consume starch, you have caries. And if you don't have caries, it means that you don't consume starch. Now, there is another starch-associated genetic phenomenon we have to mention, and this is it's called the ME1. So it's in on the amylase, the amylase AMY1. It's called the gene, and in humans there are more copies than in chimpanzees. So and the question that really, so it means actually that humans became adapted to consume more starch because these amylase, it's actually the amylase in the mouth, not in the stomach, it's an enzyme that helps to break down starch to sugars. And so the idea that it was more prevalent because of the more copies that we had. So it means that we were becoming more adapted to consume higher amount of starch. And this is true. And this change happened according to the research with the appearance of Homo sapiens. So Neanderthals don't have it. They have only 2 copies. And we have between 2 and 16 copies of the gene. So the conclusion is that it actually could not have been before, in the common ancestor of us and Neanderthals. So it happened with us, but the pace of that cannot be really. We don't know. We don't know whether we started with 2 and then 4, 5, 6, because today you find population with 2 and you find population with 16 copies. So, and also that the fact that there's such a wide range, to me, points to the fact, to conclusion that it was not so, it wasn't long enough and it was not fixed in the human genome, this wide range.
Switching tact a little bit, isn't it really the case that it's very, very difficult to hunt and kill live prey? So one argument that's often been put forward, I believe, is that in hunter-gatherer societies, the women gather, the men hunt. The men aren't particularly successful at hunting because it's just very difficult. But occasionally they're successful, and when they are, they bring home, some meat, which is sought after in a group that doesn't get that much meat. And this can help adult males, in their rise up the hierarchy of the tribe, maybe improve their access to women. And so, but also that there's not just an energetic issue here, a sort of a calorie issue, but a nutrition issue. That getting a little bit of certain nutrients that are rather scarce is great compared to getting none of them. So when they do successfully hunt prey, it's particularly prized. That's what we see in part, I think, in modern day hunter-gatherer groups. No doubt I'm getting that somewhat wrong and simplifying, but I think it's the case that most food comes, in terms of calories, comes from the gatherers rather than the hunters. But again, I suspect that you would argue that that's flipped from the situation in our deeper past when megafauna was more available. But then I would say, how easy is it for a group of humans who aren't particularly strong, who can't run fast, to be able to bring down a large deer or certainly a large elephant? Of course, elephant species back in the day were typically far bigger than they are even today. Is it realistic to suggest that these bipedal, slow animals without claws could really capture much prey? Or were they, as you've mentioned, scavengers who were hoping that on occasions they could frighten off some lions or get to the marrow in bones that the lions or whatever, or hyenas, hadn't quite bothered to tap into? If that's the case, it doesn't paint the picture of there being much meat available to eat, really.
Yeah, okay. But at least recent research in Africa came to the conclusion that humans had what they call first access to animals. There are always the choice parts in hunted animals that humans, as well as other carnivores, go to. And based on what they found on the bones, like teeth mark or cut marks of stones, they can say who got first access to that specific animals. Now, it doesn't say whether it was hunted or not, but and in these sites, which are, some of them are 1.8 million years, 1.4 million years ago, humans had already first access to very large animals. So the conclusion was that they hunted them because the humans for sure don't have any advantage in getting to scavenging situations compared to four-legged animals. So this is one of the let's say support that I can gather. The other one is that even in recent groups, hunter-gatherers used to hunt. I mean, they hunt. The Hadza, for instance, this is the group that you refer to actually when you say that the women get most of the food and the hunters succeed like 5% of the time. You're right. I mean, in factually speaking, yes. In the Hadza, I think it's about 30 or 40% only from animals. But most of it comes from large animals. and they are seasons. It depends on the seasons. The dry seasons, for instance, where the animals have to go to a certainly known places where they can find water. The Hadza perform ambush hunting and get quite a lot of meat from that. I've been to the Hadza area, and it doesn't look anywhere near what a typical environment of Paleolithic hunters would look like. It's a bushy area, very thorny bushes. If you go around, you see the droppings are mainly of cows. So it means that the area is used by neighboring tribes to, as pasture. So they don't leave much pasture for wild animals. So they start to hunt smaller animals. Completely, by the way, they hunt with not with stones, but with
spears.
No, but the heads are from iron. Okay, the iron heads that they actually trade with neighboring tribes. Most Huns actually speak 2 languages. They are bilingual. So, to what extent these guys are a good example or a good analogy for Paleolithic hunters, I don't think so. I think this is really, in my opinion, and I'm just working on another paper in that direction, it's the mother of all evils to take the analogy of present hunter-gatherers so lightly and just to say, oh, because they were 5% success rate in, the Hadza has 5% success rate, so in 2 million years ago, hunters also had 5% success rate. No way. If you go to the African savannah, okay, Ngorongoro or other places like that, you'll see that there's really almost no plant food available to gather. But on the other hand, you have many, many animals, and they are quite visible because it's flat. There are no trees, and there's a lot of grass. So it's completely different environment, completely different technology. A lot of the, you're interested in energetics, so at least the current data show that the energetic return on hunting, and I'm talking about recent hunter-gatherers because we don't have numbers for Paleolithic, so I'm doing some analogy here. The return on hunting is about 10 times the return on gathering. And that means that, and this is any animal, will actually consume more of the food that provides the higher return. So there you are.
So to be clear, that group is getting about, well, roughly speaking, 90% of its calorie intake from meat and about 10% from other sources.
In the Paleolithic. Today, it's just, it's higher, it's a higher return, but let's say maybe the return is measured in the dry period, okay? So, you have to deal with the data. And also, when women don't have alternative, but to gather plants, they gather plants. So they will gather plants with a lower return than hunting because they actually don't have an alternative to hunt. They have to keep an eye on the children. So in humans, the division of labor actually point to that actually the gathering would have composed a higher part of the diet, compared to other, not relative to the energetic returns. That's what I'm saying. But there is evidence that women used to also participate in the hunting, and especially of large animals, where you actually use a community. It's called community hunting. So everybody is participating in the hunting. So it depends on the ecology. It's not necessary that women only did gathering.
Okay. So what I'm interested in the last section of this discussion is to contrast and consider what we're told we should eat in terms of macronutrients and what we're perhaps evolutionarily mostly set up to eat. So, for example, again, I'm going to use this phrase, the received wisdom until recently was reduce the fat in your diet. Now, pretty recently, the last few years, 10 years or something, that's changed. And of course, there are different sorts of fats, and maybe we can touch on that in a minute. But broadly speaking, fat is seen as a little bit less evil than perhaps it once was. Although I guess if you're trying to reduce the number of calories in food by volume, stripping away the fat can help. Okay, so there's that. But nonetheless, there's less concern than there was about eating fat per se. I guess perhaps part of the thought previously was the fat will go straight to your fat stores because it's already fat or something like this. Now the focus is on eating less sugar, reducing sugar levels, partly because of the effect it has on insulin levels and sugar levels in the body and generating diabetes, but also because sugar is easily converted to fat. So there's a bit more of focus on that. Okay. And although protein is marketed to sports people and people using gyms and these sorts of things, there's also the argument that the amount of protein needed to stay fit and healthy and to maintain healthy muscle mass is not that high. There are arguments to say that actually older people should try and increase their protein intake because perhaps their bodies are a little bit less able to break those down to the amino acids and then build them back up. But nonetheless, an egg and a piece of chicken or a piece of cheese a day or something like that is enough. So protein is necessary, but that's okay. So that's kind of where we are. In light of those kind of broad recommendations from the powers that be, all right, lowish, but be careful with fat levels, low sugar intake. You don't need a great deal of protein, but some is necessary. What diet, Mickey, would you recommend in terms of macronutrient composition? And I say recommend in terms of, as far as I'm aware, you're not a nutritionist, but I think you espouse the idea that what's good for us is probably what we're evolutionarily set up to eat. That doesn't mean there can't be other things that, as it happens coincidentally, we could find a good diet, but nonetheless, an obvious starting point is to eat what we're evolutionarily adapted to eat. And based on that, what would be your, in inverted commas, recommendations for people in terms of macronutrient composition?
Okay, first I will start with a little background. We are eating today foods that was not available during most of our evolution, and there's no argument about that. Okay, for instance, soy oil, was not available. If you take soy, nobody can produce oil at home, so you need a factory to do that. But there are others. Even the bread that we eat today is not the bread that we ate in the past. This is maybe, it's made of wheat that was developed maybe 50, 60 years ago. Somebody got a Nobel Prize for it. And it's being baked in 1 hour from, it's not fermented, and if generally speaking, the preparation of plant food is much more elaborate than the preparation of meat. So I'm talking about traditional societies, yeah. And this is one answer to this blue aisles or whatever it's called. The traditional preparation of plant foods it involves fermentation, soaking, germination, and the purpose of all these is to get rid of certain components in the plant foods that can be toxic. So, for instance, you know, I will not go to the details, but many plant foods have toxic components that we learned how to get rid of them in traditional societies. Most of this knowledge is lost because we live in cities and we don't remember, or we don't know what our grandmothers ate and our grandmothers, etc. So the other thing is that we are adapted, and we continue to adapt to the diet. For instance, adaptation to consume milk or to consume wheat. Okay, so people that have celiac or that have all kind of sensitivities. The problem is that we don't know. Most people, apart from myself, of course, and others, a little bit, few others, don't do genetic examination of their genes to know what they would be sensitive to or not. And even, by the way, if they did, we don't know. All the experts don't know all the sensitivities, etc. So to me, the evolutionary terms is a safety term. In other words, in an environment that have very many new foods that are prepared in a new way, the best thing or the safest is to stick with the old, very, very old, and the oldest food that you can find, and this is meat. So the more meat and fat, animal fat, that you eat, the safer you are. Now, if you want to eat other, if you want to eat, plant foods, just make sure that they are processed properly, and try to find out if you're sensitive to them.
Yes, because realistically, it's unlikely many people are going to eat a super heavily meat-based diet. I mean, some will, but most people want more variety. They can see it in the shop, so it's difficult to not eat it. And actually, meat's typically expensive as well. Of course, that's for people who are prepared to eat meat in the first place, and some people are vegetarian or whatever, but that's another matter. So they're going to want to eat some degree of fruit and plants. Okay, and you mentioned fermentation and
fruit should be good. Fruits, I know fruits. I mean, fruits are actually in nature rely on people eating them and spreading the seeds. So fruits are not likely to have any anti-nutrients in them. So fruits are okay, in my opinion. Vegetables should be more careful. For instance, I cannot eat eggplants. Eggplants give me so much problems. I just don't eat them. Some people are sensitive to other vegetables. So, and okay, people like the colors, but I think fruits are okay. Vegetables, be careful. And wheat, by the way, make sure it's fermented before it's baked.
okay, and the reason to ferment it first is that it breaks down the fibers into more digestible
No,
foods in
not
our
the fibers.
stomach.
Not the fibers. In wheat, for instance, is the gluten. You
Okay.
know, the baguette, the French baguette, is very light and it's very full of holes, right? And it dries very quickly. That's because it's fermented for 12 hours before it's baked.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Right. So in fact, right. Okay. So French bread, which is a very popular form of bread to eat, it's kind of crunchy and its taste is just attractive. And
Right.
I'm based in the UK, but we eat a lot of people. You see a lot of French baguettes around.
Right.
But actually, I think often it would be considered to be a relatively poor form of bread because it's white bread. Um, you're arguing that actually it's a relatively good form of bread because it traditionally goes through a long fermentation process before the baking.
Yeah, I mean, these dark breads are really bread that, it's not much more than a dark color that's added to it. I mean, they add something to it, but the difference is really
Well, I mean,
negligible.
wholemeal breads, proper wholemeal breads, I suppose, don't use such processed flour.
Wholemeal bread you can do at home. If you take and do the milling at home, yeah. Otherwise, I don't see where when I maybe it's available in England. It's not available here.
I mean, progressively more breads are available. It's kind of a slightly a fashionable
Yeah,
thing at
but
the
they
moment.
actually what they do is they grind and then they add. They separate it and then they add as part of the seed uh, to create the color, to create some texture. But anyway, let's leave it.
In your mind, are polyphenols, this is a popular word at the moment, polyphenols, are these of value at all?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know enough.
Okay. I mean, I think there's some polyphenols in animal meat, as I understand it. I haven't looked into this, but a little birdie has told me this is the case. So I suppose the question would have been, are there enough polyphenols found in meat? And I guess therefore your argument would be yes, albeit you don't know a lot about polyphenols, because otherwise we'd be seeking them elsewhere. Um, although, as you say, very rarely have people ate a purely meat diet. There is always some degree of plants in the diet, and possibly, but we don't really know how much of
I don't
the.
know that polyphenols are really that, without polyphenols you will die. I don't think so. Like I said, it's not my area of expertise.
I suppose what I'm trying to get to, and that's fine, so we'll move on. But I suppose what I'm trying to get to is when plants were eaten in the past, in the distant past, was that really just to bulk out, to add calories to the diet, or were there some things in those plants that might not have been essential, but were nutritionally valuable that made individuals healthier? And I guess that's difficult for us to know.
It's difficult for us to know, and I don't know. I don't know. I, you know, I don't think so because the plant composition would have changed from place to place more than the meat. Meat is meat. Meat is meat in Africa, in Australia, in everywhere. Plants are different in each location. So, uh, so the likelihood that all of them will have the contribution, the same vitamins or sense is not very high. I personally don't think that it was because I see people that eat only meat and live happily and healthily.
Yes, okay.
So I don't think.
The plant issue is a discussion for another day, and I think there would be other people that would be in a better position to sort of argue for them than I can. But I take your points. Um, Last couple of things. So, what's your broad thoughts, if you have them, on what are the health issues for people who are eating diets that are so mismatched with the diets of our ancestors? I mean, clearly there's an issue of obesity, presumably from overeating, predominantly overeating. But what are the issues about eating a diet that is where the macronutrient proportions, for example, are very different to what we're evolved for, or, for example, for eating a vegetarian diet, so a diet that has no meat in it? What are the broad health concerns, do you think?
No, take all the Western, health problems, and there you have it. I think most of them come from eating plants and eating not the right proportion of meat of fat, because the animal fat is a good storage for vitamins and the meats, of course. So, in my opinion, most of the Western world problems or health problems stem from the fact that we eat plants, that we don't prepare them properly, and then that we produce new foods like the soy oil, uh, So this is my opinion. That's why I don't want to start. It's not my area of expertise either to start connect a specific food to specific illnesses.
Indeed, indeed, but broad brush, your feeling is that a lot of the ills in society today are to do with this mismatch between what we're evolved to eat and modern diets. Right. Okay. Right. Well, on that bombshell, I think we can finish this fascinating discussion. Miki, thank you so much for your time. I'm indebted to you and very lucky to have had the opportunity to have this chat, and I'm sure lots of people will be listening in.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the English accent and the discussion as well. One thing that didn't come up in our discussion is the importance of protein. You talked about it, but protein is a very interesting subject. Humans, unlike other carnivores, are limited in the amount of protein that they can process to energy, metabolize, to about 35% of the calories. And that's what drove something that we see quite clearly, in my opinion, in the ecological record, the quest for fat. So because the animals don't contain a lot of fat, they suddenly, so if you are limited to 65%, so 35% protein, and you hunt an animal and you only feed on that animal, you would want the animal to have 65% fat, right, of the calories fat, so you can consume the whole animal. But most animals don't have 65%. So what you see in the archaeological record, and I just published a paper about it, you see the quest for fat. Fatty animals, big animals have more fat than smaller animals. Mature animals have more fat than young animals. And you can also see patterns of partial exploitation of only fat parts of the animal. So that, to me, proves that people were mostly on the limit of their consumption of protein. In other words, if we want to go back, we were close, depending of course on the plant composition, but let's say if it was 10%, so 15%, about 20% of our nutrition came from protein. And this is much higher than what is the common today. Very difficult to get to high levels of protein. I'm telling you, I'm that eating mostly meat actually take also powder, protein powder, to get to protein. Like you said, older people need more protein than younger people. And I noticed my wife, she doesn't eat a lot of meat. She mainly feed on milk products, all kind of cheeses, etc. But she will never, ever get to the proper or the required, the minimum amount of protein, which for her age, in my opinion, is at least 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. The minimum is 0.8 for younger people, okay? It's 0.8 gram per kilogram of body weight. I think we should go to 1.5, maybe 2, but nobody gets to it. And I can't get to it either. So I need to take powder. So this, in my opinion, is one of the problems with the current nutrition, is the inavailability of protein, because plants don't have a lot of protein.
Okay, so to get to that, so if you're talking maybe up to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of weight, let's take a 70 kilogram adult, that's 140 grams, for example. Maybe that's top end, but 140 grams. How could someone realistically get to 140 grams naturally, as it were, i.e. not taking protein powder supplements? I mean, it requires a mostly meat-based diet. Is that fair?
See, 140 grams protein in terms of meat, you have to multiply it by 5 because the rest is water. So that's a lot of meat. Nobody eats these amounts of meat.
But you're saying that we did?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, whereas the modern idea, well, okay, the modern idea is we don't need that much protein. People tend to, or at least sort of American style diet tends to overload on protein. However, there's that caveat for older people. Actually, you would advocate that ideally we do need quite a decent amount of protein, quite a high level of protein, and unless we're going to take supplements,
we need to be very careful, and we need to guard that we do get. Most people, in my opinion, don't get even the minimum amount of protein.
But that would manifest as pathologies.
You eat salad, and you eat cheese, and you eat whatever. I mean, you feed on bread, salad, cheese. You just where is the protein?
Well, cheese has a reasonable amount.
Some cheese have some, but cheese is like, it's not the main course. Cheese is, a few grams.
I mean, my 3-year-old daughter eats a lot of cheese.
Good for her.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Sorry, what was I going to say? But however, if we really needed that amount of protein, then that would be the fact that we're not would be manifesting as pathologies. But I'm not aware that that's happening.
Well, I see a lot of sarcopenia in older people.
Yes.
That's manifested. I'm not sure. I don't know details of how how pathologically will this be expressed. I just know from an evolutionary point of view, we did consume a lot of protein. Mm-hmm. And by the way, maybe it does manifest in the fact that our hunger is not very well regulated.
Yes, that there is an argument that protein ingestion satiates better.
One of the reasons for obesity is that we don't eat enough protein. By the way, this is not my hypothesis. This is something that already was made before me.
Are you aware of the protein leverage hypothesis?
That's the one. That's the one I was talking about.
Yeah. Yes. I never quite managed to develop the research theme to explore that, unfortunately. But it's very intriguing, and there's a growing evidence and some counterpoints, of course, but there's growing evidence that it has some value. The idea that we keep eating, we keep feeling hungry until we've eaten the amount of protein that our body feels we need. So we eat, we're taking the calories, but our body keeps being hungry to drive us to eat in the hope it'll get protein. If our diet had more protein in it, then our body would stop making us feel hungry quicker because it's got the protein it needs, and so it's satisfied.
Could be.